We're going to go ahead and get started with our session here, right on time. Um, I appreciate your independence, but if we could, you know, lock in. Um, I'm Adam Peshek, and I'm Vice President for Education at Stand Together. Stand Together, it's a philanthropic community. We really focus on empowering parents, teachers, and communities to reinvent education from the ground up, really making education more personalized, more tuned into the needs of individual students. And today we're going to have a conversation about childhood independence, uh, which feels especially timely. If you were at the last panel, one of the questions was around America's 250th, and I think at Stand Together, we're really doing a big push for America's 250th. What does it mean to be an American? So that when people inevitably ask that question over the next 8 months, we have, answers to what we think the American experience has been. And for us, looking back 200 years ago to Alexis de Tocqueville and his book Democracy in America has a lot of the keys for what that means. And I really recommend you go. I've been going through it. It's hundreds of pages, but it's really 5 to 10 pages a chapter. You can kind of read them, and they're really travelogues where de Tocqueville was commissioned by the French to go out there and describe what it meant to be an American. And he started out what most rational people would do: let's go to Washington D.C. and see what it's all about. What are the laws? What are the politics? He wasn't all that impressed with that, but when he went into to America, the 25 states that were around at that point, he was really impressed by the character of the American people, their reflexive independence, their responsibility to themselves and their communities, and that belief that problems that as they arise, it wasn't not waiting for someone else to solve those problems, but actually going out there and solving them in your community. And that real strength in America is that you give people the ability to feel capable that they can do something, that they can make decisions for themselves, that they can manage risk, that they can navigate the world on their own terms as independent individuals. And the spirit of that really is something that we want to see rekindled in America. It's something that was taught explicitly and implicitly in the stories we told, in the histories that we told. But more importantly, it was modeled by people. And the students could see that coming up as they were growing. And this idea of independence was encouraged, and conversely, dependence was discouraged. And so today we see, I think, a lot of childhood autonomy, at least for the past 20, 30, 40 years, really declining, free play declining. Um, the ability to simply roam the world and experience the world as individual children has kind of declined. But we think that those are really some of the foundations for independence. And we want this next generation, if we want them to thrive in work, in life, in relationships, we really need to give them that room to grow. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have three excellent leaders who've been working and navigating this space for a while. Um, we have Senator Filmore from Utah, who's helped pass the nation's first, I believe, childhood independence law in 2018. He's going to talk a little bit what he did there. We have Nicole Runyon, who's worked with families in her book Free to Fly, highlights some of the developmental costs of not kind of inculcating this independence in children, and she'll talk a little bit about her work both as a psychologist and what she's seeing working with families. And last but not least, we have James Adams from Pickens County School District in South Carolina, who's actually integrating some of this independent play and life skills into their day-to-day work in a school district. And so hopefully, my hope at the end of this would be, if Alexis de Tocqueville came down 200 years later, he would be looking at children that exhibited the same qualities that he saw 200 years ago. So let's dive in and let's start talking a little bit about some of these issues. I mean, let's start um, with you, Nicole. What you're developing a little bit. Well, let's actually start here. You all look at this from different angles. You see a psychologist, someone working in schools, a senator who's kind of looking at this at the statewide level. How do you define childhood independence, and what does that actually mean to you, Nicole? Let's start.
So, when I started thinking about this question, it reminded me of a childhood memory that I had. I grew up in Metro Detroit, just off of the famous 8 Mile, actually. And at 8 Mile and Jefferson, there is a road that it runs along the lake. And my best girlfriend and I decided to ride our bikes one day. Well, this was long before cell phones, long before tracking, and long before parents were worried about children being unsupervised out in the world. We rode our bikes 8 miles all the way to the end of the lake that ended at a metro park. We didn't have a destination. We didn't know where we were going. And we just rode and rode and rode and we stopped and we realized, oh, we're at the park. We had no idea that we had ridden that far. And I remember that feeling. It was the summer between seventh and eighth grade. And I thought, wow, look what we did. I was so proud of us. And I felt like I could do anything. Independence is finding out what we're made of. It's also finding out what our parents' authority is made of. If we forget our lunch, mom and dad aren't DoorDash. Well, they shouldn't be, although they are now. And so, what we need to do is allow children to experience those natural consequences because in that, they develop those problem solving skills. Maybe they borrow some food from a friend and they pay them back the next day. Maybe they beg, borrow, and steal to get somebody to pay for their lunch. They become resourceful. They figure out how to solve problems. They figure out how to make decisions. And this is what independence means. It's that sense of I can do it, I'm capable, and that builds that self trust and resiliency in our kids.
Senator, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll illustrate this with a story too. My niece and her kids, her 4 kids, stayed over at my house. This was a couple years ago. And at my house, there's a park, but honestly, as a kid, I think it's kind of a boring park because there's no playground. There's like a pavilion and tables and a fire pit and then a big grass field. And it's built on like an old farmstead. So you've got old sheds and, interpretive signs that tell you this is where the sheep would go, stuff like that. So anyway, we go to the park. The kids have fun at the park. In the house, however, we got a ton of stuff. I got an air hockey table. We wanted our house. This is going to be the house where the kids are going to want to hang out. So air hockey, double shot, movie theater, costume bin, all that stuff. The next morning, we're having breakfast, and my 8 to 4-year-old, I guess, grand nieces and nephews say, "Can we go outside and climb that tree?" And instead of all this great stuff we've got indoors, like they want to be outside climbing the tree, which this park does have some really great trees. You know, we, as you mentioned at the beginning, society has just become one of keeping the kids close and tethered. And I'm afraid that what we are demonstrating to children is that we don't trust them, and we're telling them, we don't trust you, we don't have confidence in you, and you shouldn't have confidence in yourself to be able to do these things on your own. And as kids grow and they get into middle and high school and college, uh, you know, uh, you end up with situations where parents have to call the college to get the kids' class schedule because the kids don't have the skills, the knowledge, but really importantly, the confidence in order to make a cold phone call to talk to somebody about something that they need. So I think that's pervasive in society. It's been building over a long time, and my effort in Utah has been to try to kickstart a societal change, and I'm very grateful for, people who write books about this and have started big nationwide movements to tackle this challenge. From a policy standpoint, I think there are things that we can do, but it really takes a cultural change, and so the point of policy should just be to kickstart the cultural change and to move it along.
That's great. James, how do you think about childhood independence, and how do you see that in your school district?
So I thought about this question a while, and I think in education, the challenge is that we are stewards of so many other people's children. And so when I think about independence, it's really how are we supporting the work of the families and the communities in building the next group of independent, strong, and resilient adults who will continue and carry on the work of maintaining our society. So, because we are essentially educating the next husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, and all of the other things that those people will do. And so, while when you get to the individual parent level, what child independence looks like is different based on each and everybody's context. And so, but when we're stewarding 16,000 children, then it becomes more of a bird's eye view of how are we empowering these children with a sense of and giving them the tools they need to develop self-control, responsibility, self-management, and a sense of belonging to a community. So
Let's follow that thread. Nicole, you're a child psychologist. What are you seeing in the trends that, might make this worrisome for you, or why is this so important to a child's development?
So, what I saw in my practice as early as 2014, when really a correlation between the schools in my community allowing for the phones to be on during the school day, I saw a direct correlation and an influx of severe mental health issues. I had gotten a very large amount of adolescent girls in particular coming out of the hospital after their first suicide attempt. Many of them were self harming, eating disordered behavior. And these were families who were intact, loving, supportive, caring parents, and nothing rooted in anything trauma or anything psychosocial. And this was before everyone started to talk about the phones, before it was a mainstream concept. And so the only thing I could connect it to was their usage of the devices. And over time, what I realized was that the devices are just a symptom. Ultimately, the issue is that parents are not stepping into their authority enough. They're afraid to say no. They're afraid to allow their kids to be out in the world and find out what they're made of because it's not the norm and it's not what everyone's doing. And ultimately, it's this combination between what kids are doing on the tech. We should definitely be concerned about that. But we need to be equally concerned with what they're not doing because they're on the tech. And what they're not doing is developing those skills and becoming resilient and reaching maturity.
Let me jump in here because I was going to ask this later, but could you describe, you talk about the three key stages in your book. Can you describe a little bit what that is to set some context for the conversation?
Sure, yeah. There are three critical periods in childhood where children develop this sense of individuation or separation from their parents. And it actually starts as early as 2, and then 9, and then 16. So we all know the terrible twos, right? And they're terrible because it's the I will not, it's the do it by myself. Those two statements are exactly what they're trying to tell their parents, which is, I need you to listen to me and my boundary, and I need you to have a boundary so I can learn how to respect other people's boundaries. And this is really a message to parents that they are individuating and becoming their own people and separating. And so parents need to understand just that combination and that balance. So, do it by myself should actually absolutely be encouraged. Get themselves dressed. It will take an hour, but that's what they need. And then on the other side, I will not. Sometimes they do have to do what you're asking of them more often because of their safety, and that's really important. And then that next phase is 9, where they develop a consciousness around themselves as an individual outside of the family. And so friends become more important. They want to please teachers. They become interested in extracurricular activities. And this is a great time. I always say an adolescent and a bike are a great combination because this produces some anxiety, this fear of, I don't want to grow up. And so independence is the antidote for anxiety in this phase of development. And what we're doing right now for kids at this age, 3rd grade, right around there, is giving them a device and tracking them and saying the world is too scary. And so we're fracturing that development. And it's no wonder we're seeing so much anxiety. Actually, I addressed this because I saw it so much in my practice that now I coach parents. I don't even see kids anymore because what I've found is that we have to stop pathologizing this. This is like they're the canaries in the coal mine. They're reacting to their environment and they're trying to tell us something. And I think educators and parents and policymakers need to understand that. And lastly, 16, that's a time when they're saying, I'm ready. I'm ready to drive. I'm ready to get a job. I'm ready to be out in the world. And we really need to respect that without tracking them because we need to hold them accountable to us because we ask them to stay in touch with us. We ask them to tell us where they are. That's a relationship. So if they respect us, then they need to be accountable and tell us where they are and call us if they're going to be late. And they lose that skill if we put Life 360 on them and we tap a button and we say, oh, now we know where you are. And they don't develop that. That's really important.
Yeah, that's great. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, so I'm very familiar with the terrible twos. Um, but you do see it. You see, my kids. I want to help with the laundry. I want to help cook. I want to. You do all these things, and it's not intuitive to let them because I can do it better. But like knowing that you should lean into that and let them do a poor job at what you're trying to do as a way to teach them, that makes a lot of sense. Um, Senator Filmore, I mean, Nicole just mentioned that, it's not necessarily all about the tech, but it's really about what they're not doing because of the tech. And a lot of the childhood independence laws, I think, are trying to create the space to give them the ability to do more. Can you describe what these are and why you did it?
Yeah, I part of why I think we're so overprotective as we are is because government policy has encouraged it, sometimes explicitly. Um, we I think the several policy issues that are at play here, and part of it is how the government interacts with schools, and what we force schools to do, and how much time we force them to spend on A, B, or C, which leaves a lot less time for recess than I had when I was a kid. And I honestly was shocked to learn that my elementary students only have one recess a day. Um, that is largely because the state government has forced schools to do so much other stuff, and I think that when we're thinking about education policy here at an education policy summit, that man we really need to recognize that children's independence is crucial to their educational success, and that they need time to have um, unsupervised, unmediated time with peers, instead of just always playing, organized games that are organized by adults, run by adults, supervised by adults. Um, I don't want to go too deeply down that rabbit hole. As states defined childhood neglect, which is a real thing and is a real problem, but the definition of childhood neglect tends to be so broad, um, with just statements like putting kids in danger, um, not being around, that it ends up to the interpretation of the most risk averse CPS caseworker. And so that's why you end up with a parent in Georgia arrested in front of her kids because her 10-year-old walked to the store, or uh, you know, kids being picked up by the police and hauled back home. And again, parents arrested for walking to school or for shooting basketball at the basketball hoop in their own front yard, unsupervised by an adult. These kinds of things happen because state policy and state laws allow them to happen. And so states need to dial back, that leeway that we grant to, risk averse. I don't want to be pejorative about government workers. I know they're all trying to do the right thing the best they know how, um, but it cannot be the standard of the most risk averse government employee that governs parenting in our culture. Um, and it's good. So we need to define things out of neglect, which is what we did in our I don't know, we're calling it childhood independence, reasonable childhood independence. Back then it was called the Free Range Kids Bill. Um, but we just defined out things like kids can be alone, and it's not neglect. They can be alone at home. They can be alone at a park. They can walk to school. These things are not neglectful. It's only neglect, you withhold food from a kid, right? Um, or put them in a situation that is truly and imminently dangerous, and not one that just has some risk that a kid might get hurt.
Yeah, I live in Georgia, and last year you might have seen it was in the news. A woman got arrested because she let her 10-year-old son walk about a mile to the store by himself, which when I was growing up is I would do that almost every day. But literally came to her house, put her in handcuffs, arrested her, and that's not an isolated event. We see it all over the place. And getting to what Senator Fillmore mentioned, there's just this idea we think about kind of neglect and letting kids out and not be supervised, but if you follow like Lenore Skenazy at Let Grow, Jonathan Haidt co-founded that organization with her and the developmental psychologist Peter Gray. I mean, Peter Gray has detailed like so much of our development as a species came from the ability to negotiate, to learn, and like a lot of what kids are doing when they're playing in a free space, to the point of not having everything be organized, is you're learning how to make up rules to a game, how to negotiate, how to interact with people that doesn't require a representative standing over you, telling you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. And so this has been a big push that lots of schools have done across the country. So for James, I wanted to ask you, you're from Pickens County's school district, and you've really made a priority for some of this independent play in your school district. Can you describe a little bit about like the impetus to do that and kind of what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, so first I'll say that if you're looking for a particular program to solve your challenges, you've already lost. And so our district, I mean, I'm blessed to work for a superintendent, Dr. Danny Merck, who understands that complex problems uh, require complex solutions. And so, kind of a systematic approach. So, our framework for our district is one where we have focused on integrating play within our instruction period. And so, that starts at the 4K level. Our 4K is a fully immersed experiential 4K model, which it's play and education all the way through. And we're rolling that up to our K5 as early as next year. And then we have other layers to build in um, supports for students and well-being. So, for example, like my county has 400 to 500 churches in the county, 500 square miles, and we have at least 5 churches that adopt every single school. So they love on our staff. They love on just our those schools and the children when children are in need. So we've got all of that partnerships as well. We've got the second largest All Pro Dads chapter in the U.S. And so, when you look at the data for children and their development and the challenges that children face, fatherlessness is right up there as one of the largest causes of it. And so we've got that there. We've got employee child care components, and so we've partnered with some nonprofit groups to create outdoor experiential learning experiences. All of our second graders learn to swim at the YMCA. We've got uh, two recesses at every grade level, and then when you get up into the middle school level, we've with flex time. All of the schools call it something different, but it's essentially the tier 3 flex time, where we've ramped up intramurals and clubs that are student focused, so things that students are interested in, that they just have to find an adult who's willing to be their sponsor, which all that person really does is provide the space for where the group meets. Um, so then when we get up to high school, our high schools are building in systems they're more focused on things like, the best way I could to make you understand it would be to look at the military code of conduct. So like anyone that has gone through the military, that code of conduct follows that person for their entire life. They raise their children by that same code of conduct. And so like two of our high schools, one in particular, Daniel High School, they've developed the Pride model, which is purpose, respect, integrity, um, dedication, and empathy. And then we've got another school that has character first, which is focused, integrity, respect, service, and timeliness. And so they're just developing systems like that to try to build into giving kids purpose, giving kids the resources that they need. So as far as play goes, our whole district is focused on providing structures for students and making breaks for students and teachers to build natural connections with each other, natural connections across their peers. We're also the state that has a no cell phone policy. And so our lunchrooms have gotten a lot louder. Every school has an outdoor classroom space. And then I've also got another partnership that's reached out to us about utilizing some of the camps in our local areas and parks. So, like Camp Out in Sunset, which is in the woods, they wanted to do some day camps with some of our fourth and fifth graders. And so it's all across the board for us. And I think the reason why we've done that and why we've been successful, because it said how's it impacted the culture, we've increased the number of field trips. And so while I can't say we have necessarily done a whole lot of free play, because that's very difficult to do at a school setting. I mean, quite honestly, to use a story, my son climbed a tree. He's 6. He climbed a tree. He was 4 at the time. He got up there pretty high, and he's like screaming, "Daddy, get me down." My wife's like, "Get him down." I said, "I didn't get him up there." So I'm like, "Son, you got up there. You're gonna have to get down." Now, if he had fallen and broken his leg, that's my son. Like that's nobody's gonna hold. My wife's not gonna sue me. Like but we're raising him together. But that's a different thing. Of I've got 9 kids who say they want to jump off this ridge when we go on an outside field trip in the woods, hiking, and they want to jump into the lake and one drowns. And so we have provided spaces for them to be free. We took our teachers, they took kids on a hike, which was about 2.5 miles. And I was the facilitator, kind of thrown in there. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know the way either. But the teachers struggled with letting the kids, pick up stuff and, do it. I'm like, look, as long as they don't jump in the water, the path is laid out. They can't only go so far, and other than getting poison ivy, which everybody needs to feel that at least once. Um, that's how you learn what it is. Once you've got it, now you're like, oh, I know what that is. So I guess I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, maybe some more policy solutions so that the
Yeah.
kid who climbs a tree and jumps off doesn't have a cause to sue the school district would probably be another thing. Senator, let's circle back because he brought up a good point around like this is the trade-off. You're trying to promote more independence. You're risking one bad case of a million is gonna. So how do you think about that as a lawmaker? As you're talking to other lawmakers?
Yeah, I in some people's minds, I get blamed, and they let me know through email and phone calls every time something bad happens, right? And they're really hard cases. So even just yesterday, in my hometown of Taylorsville, Utah, a mom was arrested because her 3 kids, she had left them sleeping just in a parking lot. It happened to be the police department parking lot, which maybe she thought was a safer place, but it didn't mean there was no trouble finding the kids, right? The police did not have to look very far to find them. And another really hard case of 2 kids who were literally starved to death by their parents. Those kinds of cases are hard. Um, and I get emails. It's like, this is your, look at what you've done. um, you know, um, so we're not solving every problem here. There is a balance. We're s- Bad parents will exist and will continue to exist. But again, we just have to decide as a society that we're not going to let the most risk averse among us govern how parents help their children develop the independence that every child needs, right? Every adult needs it. And you need to develop those skills when you're in childhood. So I am supportive of policies that provide some legal protection to parks and schools, and children's and play spaces where children go, where they will be where injuries that happen in the normal course of play are just treated like they always used to be, which is, yeah, kids do stupid things sometimes, and that's exactly how we learn, right? I don't need to sue over every broken arm or skinned knee or bout with poison ivy. So I do support those kinds of things, but it um, you know, like with all things in politics, it takes not listening to the loudest voices that happen all the time, or to the interest groups, that have the most active email list. And it really is a simple policy choice to define things out of negligence, to provide ways for visionary school leaders um, to really to work to develop independence as part of their curriculum and give kids a chance to interact with each other, and then provide some protection, some legal protection for when natural consequences happen and natural lessons are learned. We should celebrate every time a kid climbs a tree and falls down and breaks an arm, because they've learned something really important about limits and about how this hurts like hell. And 6 weeks later, it's fine. Those are such great lessons to learn, right? These kinds of things that just that that cause temporary discomfort are so important for how kids learn to navigate the world.
You mentioned some of the like the horror stories, the things that, people will raise up as the one in a million example. What are some of the things that you've seen since the law has passed, or some just basic normal behavior that's now allowed that might not have been before?
Yeah, and I get emails about this too from grateful parents. Yeah, so we do find there are more kids walking to school. I think that's fantastic. More kids riding their bikes around to school. As I mentioned before, this is, I'm trying to kickstart or move along a cultural shift, um, and that it touches all kinds of things, including how cities plan. And I think one thing we're seeing is, um, and I see some of this across the country, is communities that are being planned on purpose to allow places for kids to ride their bikes, right? They're not just grids with a major busy street, right? But you have overpasses where kids can cross really busy roads, winding roads that are designed to slow traffic so that kids can feel safe riding their bike in the street. I think we're seeing more of those kinds of things. I wish it would catch on faster, but I know we've got a lot of land use policy and institutional inertia that led us maybe to the point where we were, 10 years ago or so. Um, I feel like we're climbing out of it, and you see little signs about that, including, I think, one of the most important things is since this passed in Utah in 2018, 9 other states have passed it. And in 5 of those states, it passed unanimously. And in every state that's passed it, it's passed with large and bipartisan majorities. So that's very gratifying, and I hope that progress continues. And if any of, I mean, still that means there are 40 states without protection for parents to let their kids play and be and move and learn independently. So I'd encourage anybody who's here from those states to carry the fight forward at home.
Yeah, and if I mentioned Let Grow, they track these childhood independence laws. If you go to their website, you can see the states that have done it, but it's everyone from, Georgia, Utah, Connecticut, Texas, so Illinois, across the board, blue, red, purple. There's an appetite to do this in lots of states. Nicole, you see this from the parent side and from the student side. I mean, what do you see kind of in the culture that needs to change, or that parents are rethinking now? Particularly, there's been a bit of a cultural moment with Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, with Nicole's book, with lots of kind of now discussions that we're getting into, like the Today Show, and people are actually having these conversations. What are you seeing as some of like the big cultural barriers that people really need to get over to think about this differently?
I think ultimately we, as the adults, need to be able to check in with ourselves. So the first chapter in my book is actually called The Mirror, and it's designed to help the parent or anyone interfacing with children understand that we have our stuff and we have our unresolved issues and we have wounds from our own childhoods, things that didn't get worked out because our parents and their parents didn't really understand how to show up for us in an emotional way like we now understand today. And so what happens is we look at children today and it's as if we're looking in the mirror. They are the reflection of what was missing for us. And so what do we tend to do when we have that wounding and we're not aware of it? The pendulum ends up swinging from one extreme to the other. And so culturally, we have swung from generations of people being raised to have independence be encouraged, to go out in the world and be resilient and to trust ourselves. The thing for us, though, is that the majority of us, I would say Gen X and above, we went out in the world and we got that freedom, we got that independence. But when we came home, generally speaking, our parents told us that they didn't care about how we felt about it, right? So we would maybe have a conflict with a friend or, something hard would happen out in the world and they didn't really nurture that in us. And so the pendulum has swung so far now in the other direction where we are allowing our children's feelings to drive everything. And this is very much why we aren't allowing independence because kids generally aren't as capable today as they used to be. The tech is fracturing their development at every stage, not just in independence, but social emotionally, brain development wise, and ultimately not allowing for them to have that connection to self. And so, because they're not capable, the parents have responded by saying, we have to coddle you, we have to take care of you, we have to help you with everything. And so I love James's example of his son in the tree. That is the ultimate. I trust you. You got yourself up. You absolutely can get yourself down. That was beautiful. He did. Yeah, absolutely. And I have some tree climbing stories with my kids too. I mean, I love that you both of you brought that up because that is a perfect example. And so many parents today won't even allow their kids to climb a tree. Schools won't allow it for sure because of liability, but even at the parks, it's I think the culture has shifted so much into this fear, and I think that has a lot to do with our media. I think it has a lot to do with social media, right? When something bad happens or something scary happens, it goes viral just like that. I mean, we all saw Charlie Kirk get murdered in broad daylight. Like, that's the kind of stuff that now is literally in our brains. And so we fear our kids doing anything. And so, culturally, I think us parents and anyone interfacing with kids needs to be able to check in with themselves and be uncomfortable. Because what we need for our kids to do is be uncomfortable because growing is painful. But we have to do that first because we're the container.
Yeah, and it's hard because I mean, like I said, I have a 3-year-old, and we were at the aquarium the other day. And I try to get a little separation so we can kind of, go away. But I was probably from here to there, and like the number of people who were like concerned that the child was like missing, like we gotta finally you just see, and like that impulse, it's well meaning. You see them like they're concerned, but it's also take a landscape, like see if anyone's looking at the child. But there's this kind of impulse to helicopter around any child who's not holding the hand of someone else, and it's kind of permeated through our society in a way. Um, well, if you have questions, start lining up at the microphone because we'd love to get some of your questions. One thing that if you're talking, James, to a school district leader or someone, what are some of the like the main ingredients? You listed off a lot of things that you're doing. Where would you start if you were giving advice to a school leader or a district leader?
I think it's important that we I'll start from the elementary level. Early childhood elementary level school should be fun. I mean, I don't remember any particular lesson I learned in school, but I remember every single teacher's name in order, and I loved school because it was fun. I taught high school. So high school, was not fun, but high school was cool because they were of the age where they were easy to connect with. They had a sense of agency. They had their own view of the world and those things. So it made it very easy as an ELA teacher to connect with them through the literature. So it just made it was more cool. Middle school, I don't know what to tell you other than do your best to uh, channel their sarcasm into productive ways. That would be one thing, and then also building in a sense of purpose for middle and high. Elementary fun, like I work in elementary schools now because I'm part of the team that supervises our interventionists there, and I do the behavior programming for them. And I see children walking in the hallway silent when they're asked to be silent, walk with their arms like this, catch a bubble, whatever. And I'm like, I don't remember us having to do that. I just felt like we just knew, you walk down the hall, sometimes you were noisy, like the silent lunch. Like I just don't understand that. That stuff's not fun. And so it's not fun for teachers to police it. So figuring out ways to make school fun, that's be where I would start.
Hey, well, thank you so much. So I'm on the State Board of Education, and but this question's actually personal. So I have 5 kids. Kind of feel like I might know a few things about parenting, but have a helicopter grandparent across the street. Not mine. He just is our neighbor. And so my youngest two, we have a little bike ramp, and they had it out in the middle of the street, and they're ramping the bike and having a good time. And this is the second time he's come up to me and with very much concern. Your children should not be riding their bikes in the street. they need to be riding their bikes in your backyard or take them to a bike trail like I take my grandchildren. Well, I don't have time, nor do I have the desire to. And he's very concerned about their safety, and I'm more of a free range. I don't know if you're familiar with the book Last Child in the Woods, but I love that one. Getting him out there, just let him do it. But what is your advice for all of those other people who disapprove of you not helicopter parenting? So this is probably for Nicole.
Yeah. So, what I say to parents who want to take a different route from the mainstream is that this isn't a time to follow. And we have to be able to acknowledge that, like, our family is different or our community is different. And in that way of this is our family value system. And we don't apologize for that, right? It's just like if you practice a certain religion or if your family was vegetarian, like people have to respect that that's your family value system. And I think we need to be able to own that. And this is what I mean by allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable, like acknowledging that this is a really interesting time that we're in. And if we want to take a stand and we want to make our kids okay, then we have to say that we're not following and not apologize for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and I would just say, another one that's kind of fun, Let Grow. They have I think it's called the Free Range Kids License, and parents can actually give it to kids, and it has the parent's name, the student's name, the parent's phone number, and it literally says, I have given my child the permission to go out here and explore the world or whatever. And they can hand that to people as when they get that response. But that's, I mean, we need to take back this kind of stuff because it's absurd. I mean, they say it takes a village, but the village can also be very problematic in many times. And so I would just push back and, give the 30-second speech of, I think it's important to have the kids to have independence. You had it when you were a child. Wouldn't it be great for us to have the type of childhood that you had, to those sorts of individuals?
Thank you so much for this wisdom. This is really encouraging. I have a question about the Trial Lawyers Association. To what extent have you all encountered the need to actually change the, laws about tort? You mentioned, tell us what that's like. In some states, I can imagine that would be a really big issue,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a bill I'm thinking about running, but that I haven't done yet, for the reason that you state, right? I know there's going to be some pushback. I haven't seen. Uh, so I'm afraid I just don't know the answer to your question, but I am pushing on it. But based on the past, I mean, I don't know. The trial lawyers are a lobbying group, at least in Utah, that we can overcome. We passed a good medical malpractice bill last year that they didn't like. But and it's really the same principle, right? It's just like, look, you know, doctors are fallible and they're human, and sometimes they make mistakes, and they should be held accountable for those. But um, it really is the same types of things that we're running with parents. It's just like we do not allow any risk. And if I get hurt, it's got to be somebody else's fault, and somebody else needs to pay, damn it. Um, and yeah, I think that's just part of the cultural change that needs to happen.
Hi, thank you for your session. It's really important. My name is Dr. Addie Angelov. I'm the CEO of the Paramount Health Data Project. We're an independent research organization. We pull physical health outcomes, mental health outcomes, and academic achievement data out of schools. We correlate that specifically to look at how kids are doing in reading and in math. And the conversation that you're having right now is one of the things that we have seen having the greatest impact of kids in the last 5 years on their reading and math, specifically because that idea of resiliency and problem solving, they're not applying that to their academic achievement experiences in classrooms. And so I'm curious if you all see this affecting academic achievement the way we are seeing it when we look at the quantitative data piece.
So I would say yes. I think when you talk about the resiliency and the problem solving and applying that across the board, we are definitely seeing an increase in, well, number one, students wanting to be in school because of the measures that we've put in place, and so because they're wanting to be in school, now they're receiving more instruction and having more opportunities to develop those skills. And so it just kind of one thing feeds the other, and it kind of balloons from there. But then also with the adults, and building resilience in them. Uh, so I look at data. I deal with the discipline data for our district at a large scale, and then I zero in on things and trends. And so one thing that I noticed was, of course, after COVID, everyone's discipline data tanked. Like it went way down. Like the referrals were cut in half almost, and it was like non-existent. But half, about 3,500 of our kids were virtual, and then we had them locked down. Well, yeah, and so, but then right after that, when everybody came back, you kept hearing over and over how behavior was worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But when I looked at the numbers, like just this past year, we just now gotten to discipline numbers that are above or at our pre-COVID number. So when the discipline incidents were lower and slowly climbing, the outcry for behavior was that it was worse than it's ever been. And so I'm like, well, the numbers don't bear out. So where is the disconnect? The disconnect was in the resilience of the adults, having dealt with. I mean, because COVID and everything that happened during that time was a traumatic experience that everyone went through, whether you're a mental health professional or not, whether you're a pastor or not, whether you're whatever. Everybody went through that. And so the impact on all of us, we have not really discussed. We were so focused on, hey, children are not, they're struggling, they're struggling. We were struggling. And so now that I brought that data out, we're like, okay, so how do we put things in place to help our teachers build resilience? So you talk about science of reading, science of math. We created a course for the science of behavior to help our teachers understand behavior so that they can look at and see how that my behavior and the environment also contributes to behavior, and what can I alter in the environment to better support and shape the behaviors that we want to see. And so that's the long answer to your question, but yeah, you're right. The resiliency is a factor that needs to be built in everyone.
James, we hadn't really talked about this because I think when I talk to the average parent, they just don't know how much they assume school is like what it was when they were a kid. Can you describe a little bit from your perspective, maybe when you were in school versus what you see in school now? Like just maybe why do you need some of the reforms now that maybe you wouldn't have needed 30, 40 years ago?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the introduction of technology that provides students with access to things that in the past parents could filter out. So I'll give you an example. No matter how tough my interactions were with my peers at school, when they got home, they couldn't access me. If they called the house, my dad answered the phone. He's like, "Hello, Timmy. My son don't know a Timmy. Sorry, click." So I never, didn't even know Timmy called. So it wasn't that big of a deal. So it was like those those influences stopped at the door, and for the rest of the night and for the rest of my life, it was our family. What was our family dynamic. So then I went into school, and I had a reference point to help me navigate. Well, now our devices give students unfiltered access, and you say they know the workarounds. Well, it's not really a workaround. The device is developed to connect free to the internet. That's what it's designed for. You built in a workaround to restrict it. And so our district, for example, we have a 24-hour monitoring thing that any school device, and parents can put it on their personal devices if they choose, but any school device, when they search for things that are like suicide hotline or they've got questionable things that pop up, it flags it. It's called securely. It goes to the administrators, and so the administrators are calling families, to say, "Hey, Miss Jones, your son just searched, how to kill himself." Now, he's at home with Mrs. Jones, and I'm asking my administrators to call home to to intervene. If he really was wanting to kill himself, we couldn't stop it. So, and then the kids all know that that device is there. So a lot of that is just them crying out for help. And so parents are like, "Thank you. Thanks for the contact." But I feel like that's why we have this need for educating parents on the dangers of the screens, educating folks on the need for unsupervised play, and so they have some better decision making, so they don't get themselves in a situation where someone's predatory. But it also, there are just a lot of challenges that we've opened up that were not in schools when we were in school.
Let me ask a provocative question. We still have time. I'll get to you all, but provocative question. Let's say we get to a world where, we're talking about 2-year-olds, 9-year-olds. We're solving for some of this with the independence. Does that make the devices, does that, right now it's kind of both and. Does developing more independent children, more children who can kind of skin their knee and get up, does that alleviate the need for some of the technology monitoring, the taking away, or is this always just going to be the status quo forever?
I'll address that if that's okay. Hands down, it's going to change things because I always say, you don't tell the kids to get off their phones, you show them. You show them a world where they're connected, where they're getting what they need developmentally, where they absolutely are going to fill up in such a more powerful way than the screen ever could do for them. We all know that trap of social media, right? We all, I think, can in this room acknowledge that we get into that trap. We want the likes, we want the comments, we want the validation that feels good because big tech knows that that's what we want. They've infiltrated our psychology on every level. And so a developing brain is no match for that. And so it's never enough for them, right? That connection they have on social media or their devices is never going to be enough. It's a void that they will continue to fill forever. But as we all know, because we grew up without this stuff, a real connected relationship, strong friendships, even intimacy. Like we're seeing these kids who can't have relationships, but they're watching pornography, and that is how they're getting introduced to sex. And they can't connect to each other. They're ghosting each other to break up. They don't know how to have conflict resolution. And so I think if we show them what it's like to have real relationships, then there won't be as much of a need for this stuff. And so oftentimes I'll say, to parents, they'll say, well, Pandora's box is already open. How do I take it away? What do I do? How do I curb this? And the very beginning of that is one, apologizing for bringing something into the family that you didn't understand yourself and helping them acknowledge that this was a mistake, and then filling them up in the real world.
Thank you. I'm Victoria Sullivan. I'm a senator from New Hampshire, where we do it's live free or die state, so everything is free range. Um, but I was also the sponsor of the play-based kindergarten law, which I think was the first in the country. I am expanding that to K through 3 this year with mandated recess because teachers have been using that as punishment to take away recess. It's generally the kids that need it the most. Our push, and we've invested through the preschool development grant millions of dollars literally into training teachers, but they get pushback from the administrators who don't want a noisy classroom, don't understand that movement is really great for kids in that age. How do you address that? And we support the teachers as much as we can, but they're not getting it in the building. So are you seeing the same thing, and how do you address that problem?
So for us, we don't have that problem only because our superintendent has, it's come from him. For example, we have a partnership with the University of Oulu in Finland, and so we allowed for our administrators to go to Finland so that they could see some of their play base and their some of the systems and how they incorporate independence with students and recess. And so the administrators understand. They understand what they're being asked to do and why we're being asked to do it. Now, we still have some administrators who are so worried about the academic data that the prospect of 2 recesses every day and fun Fridays once a month. I forgot to add that. So they have the fun Friday school wide. Some of them really, get their britches in a bunch when it comes to those free Fridays, but he's mandated that. And so our job as a senior leadership team is to get into the schools to support them and to help them understand why it's necessary. And so that would be the best thing is to, if it's going to come down from the top, then the person sitting at the top spot in the district has to really lead and get at the forefront of that work. And Dr. Merck does that. So that helps our administrators get on board. So we're just now fighting with teachers who are saying, you're taking away 75 minutes a week from me teaching them ELA. So we're working through that process.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie Skelfo. I'm the founder and executive director of MAMA, Mothers Against Media Addiction, and we're a grassroots movement of parents and allies fighting back against media addiction and creating a world where real life experiences stay at the heart of a healthy childhood. I think we not only want our kids to be independent, but there's centuries of evidence that show those experiences lead to healthier outcomes emotionally, socially, and academically. But I just wanted to bring something into the room that I think you just referenced as well. Um, Jonathan Haidt said it so eloquently that we've been overprotecting kids in the real world and underprotecting them online. And before I started Mama, I came to this work because as a journalist, it was abundantly clear to me how social media was connected to the national emergency in child and adolescent mental health that the American Academy of Pediatrics declared 4 years ago. We're on the fourth year of that emergency, and we now have data, and the data comes directly from social media companies themselves. Meta put out a report last year saying they took action on 48 million pieces of self-harm and suicide data across their platforms. And so, as important as it is that we foster independence in our kids in the real world, I just wanted to acknowledge that it's critically important that we protect them online because our kids are just being exposed to so much harmful content. And if they're being inundated with ideas that are unhealthy, and as you mentioned, they're experiencing it alone, they could be sitting next to their parents don't even know, then we don't stand a chance, I think, in helping them develop in ways that are socially appropriate, emotionally positive. So we advocate for legislation on the state and federal level. We want to see protections built into these products, just like we ensure our food is safeguarded and our transportation is safeguarded. We think our kids should be protected from tech products and they should have basic safeguard for child safety. So thank you for your great panel today.
Great. Well, we have about 3 minutes left. Maybe I'll just end this by asking a question to you all. Let's say, and maybe this is best to start with you, Senator Filmore. If we're thinking about what the world might look like in 5 and 10 years, we have more states that are, trying to solve for what we just heard about. The person across the street who's trying to make it life difficult for kids to be free range, the lawsuit threat. Like what might the world look like in 5 to 10 years if we can start to solve some of these things?
I hope it will include more kids riding bikes. I guess maybe another panel we could talk about sometime is the falling birth rate. So we need more kids, and we need more kids riding bikes around their neighborhood. This really takes a cultural change, a society-wide cultural change, and so it takes good state policy and lawmakers that are willing to stand out front and pass those, but it takes visionary educators who are independent of what the law requires, to take steps to put in Fun Fridays at school once a month, or to have one of those Let Grow after school play clubs. It takes a willingness to be able to say, we're going to let the kids play. Our recess monitors are not going to intervene every time two kids get angry with each other because they understood the rules differently. We're going to let the kids work that stuff out. And it takes parents who are willing to stand up to their neighbors and say, yeah, thank you for your opinion, but my kids are going to jump off a ramp that they built with a cinder block and plywood because it's fun. And I want them to have fun, and they should create those. So it takes all of those pieces. And so I'd encourage, that one who asked a question a bit ago, like it takes visionary educators from New Hampshire, right? So find visionary educators who are willing to do these kinds of things, run either as pilot programs or, loosen the restrictions so that those visionary educators can do and build, and so that parents feel free to let their kids play, and so that the schools and cities feel protected from, lawsuits that today are inevitable, so that kids can play, kids can skin their knees. It's okay.
James, what about you? What do you think?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. 5 to 10 years, we have more schools implementing what you're doing. What do we think that means for the future?
Okay. Um, well, let me start by saying this, that as educators, I have a I have a soapbox about how sometimes it appears that we in education stand in opposition to parents and families, not not so much so in what we're doing, but in the tone of what we push out to school to parents and families. And I'm really passionate about protecting that, so that that's not the case, because I feel, for example, banks, the people at the bank, they know money better than I know money, but I don't want them doing with my money anything that they want to do. Right? It's because it is still my money. Right? I mean, it's my money. I'm giving you my possession of my money, stewardship of my money, but don't keep my money from me or treat me like it's not my money. So if I'm going to take that posture with the bank, then as educators with the most precious resource on earth, which are children, I feel that it's our responsibility to steward the trust of our families and to help them navigate the world, as because we see it from a different lens. We're seeing things from the industry, that we're preparing kids for the industry, we're preparing them for life. They're also doing those things too, and so it's really a partnership that we have to be on the same page. And it is okay that that they raise their children differently than how I personally would view it. I think that's okay. It is okay that your neighbor is hyper vigilant. That could come in handy depending on if something did happen, right? Like if you got somebody that's watching the house, I don't mind that. But just kind of working together as a community to do what's in the best interest of the children that we serve. And so I think in 5 years from now, I think that relationship is going to be more important than it's ever been. Because if you look back historically in education, when let's take segregation, when the schools that had the least amount of resources and the least amount of things poured into them produced some of the greatest minds of that race. How are they able to do that? It's because the connection between the school and the community, it was symbiotic, and they valued the same things. There was not a us versus them. And so as we're more diverse now, but we're still, that relationship is more important than ever. So I think if 5 years from now, if we don't reclaim that relationship and connection between community and school, that we're going to be in the same boat or worse.
Nicole, you have the last word.
Last word, and I'll be brief because I know we're almost done. In 5 to 10 years, I think we'll have a lot less mental health concerns with our kids. We hear the term mental health epidemic. We're not in a mental health epidemic. This isn't a crisis of mental health. This is a crisis of adults that don't know what to do. And if we can step up as adults and give our kids what they need, then they can grow to be exactly what they need to be.
Great. Well, join me in thanking these great panelists and a great discussion.